Direction, right or wrong, and reasons. We asked people, which political party, if any, do you support or feel closest to? And we also asked everyone, which of the two coalitions, Kenya Kwanza or Azimio la Umoja, do you support or feel closest to? And then that allowed us to divide all of our respondents into those who are pro-government and pro-opposition. Or some didn't identify with any. There are not very many, but there were a few. One issue that caused us a little bit of a challenge, however, was Jubilee, because as I think you're all aware, there is a legal dispute as to which of the two factions, the one led by Kanini Kega, or the one led by Jeremiah Kioni, is the legal, legitimate Secretary General of the party. And even if not very many people identify with Jubilee as the main party they support, there are some, 4 or 5%, I can't remember from the data. So in order to take people who identify with Jubilee and put them into either the pro-government group of the sample or the pro-opposition, we asked them, who do you think is the correct or legal Secretary General of Jubilee? And if they said Kioni, we put them in the opposition group here, pro-opposition. If they said Kega, we put them in the pro-government group, so that we could take a question about provisions in the budget or anything else in the survey, and you'll see a few more, and really present the data in terms of political alignment. And probably the only thing worth noticing here is when we look at none, which is the by far and away the majority response about best provisions across the political divide as well as total, we see that people who are pro-government only, and I put only in inverted commas, only 71% said there's nothing in the budget that they consider good. 71%. As opposed to pro-opposition, where 11% more said that. Now, you might be surprised that there are 18% in the who support the opposition who think there might be something good in the budget. But nevertheless, you can see that difference. Again, the correlation of the 3 most common household cooking fuels with income. I really like this slide when you see a nice contrast because of a variable. Beautiful. The proportion of food Kenyans obtain usually from their family shambas, all of them, and urban versus rural dwellers. Then on economic policy, people's awareness of commodities whose costs have decreased and increased since last year's election, with more than 3/4 of the sample on the right who couldn't mention or think of any whose costs have gone down. 47 plus 31 is 78%. Not surprising. Very few things here or in most countries around the world have decreased in price. I'd even know hata ukitaka kuoa mahari imepungua imeongezeka. Sijui idadi ya ng'ombe unalipa ni zile ile ama maybe people they want their daughters to get married so they're even accepting fewer cows. Maybe mahari has gone down, I don't know. Asking people what they consider the best and worst provisions of the budget. Best provisions again. 79% didn't give us an answer on what they consider to be the best provision in the budget. Worst provision, 44% didn't give us an answer. Maybe they're waiting to see. But by far, most mentioned was the increase in the VAT on petroleum products at 24%. And correlating this with political alignment, slightly more who support the opposition couldn't mention anything they thought was best. And slightly more of people who aligned with the government didn't mention anything that they thought was worst, 47%. Although people who wouldn't identify with any political party or coalition, 53% of them couldn't identify anything that's worse. I guess they're just not tuned into politics very much. The perceived main purpose of the budget, remember I said, the first 4 choices were read out, but we also had space for people to mention what they thought was the real purpose if they didn't believe that either of those 4 we read out was the real purpose. And by far and away, the most one that was mentioned spontaneously was to allow for corruption, with nearly 3 times as many more opposition supporters mentioning that as government supporters, 21% versus 8%. And then on the housing level, again, expectations of having to pay correlated with monthly income, slightly higher level of expectation with higher income. Expectations of having to pay, again, by political alignment. People who support the government, rather more expect to pay, 66% versus 48%. Whether that's because they think it's a good idea because it's coming from the government they support, therefore they want to say they expect to pay it to make it succeed. You have to interpret that the way you want. Expectations overall that those who pay will ever get a house. And as I said at the end, even the government most recently has made it clear that only a minority of people who are paying in are likely to get a house. Most people are just paying a tax to be a good citizen so that others who are less fortunate will have access to a house. I'll speak just as Dr. Tom Wolfe, my personal opinion, not on behalf of TIFA. And I think it's very clear, and other people have pointed out, that the government is in a kind of a hole at the moment. It made, and both sides, both the Ruto and Raila campaigns made very, very extravagant comments during or promises during the campaigns. And I was telling my friends before the election, the last thing I would want to happen to me is to be a presidential candidate in this election and win, because the expectations were so high across the political divide. And you can see that's exactly what's been happening. The government's been under a lot of pressure. Luckily, as we said at the beginning, before we started, the government has not even finished 1 year in office. It's got more than 4 years before it's going to have to face the judgment of the voters again. So if its policies are going to, za matunda, the way they are advertising, they'll be in a very good position for re-election. But will that actually happen? And remember, and as commentators I think have pointed out, 2 of the big factors, actually 3. Number 1, the huge size of the debt that the government inherited from the previous government. You can't wish that away. I know some people like Jimmy Wanjigi have been advocating just default on the debt, just don't pay. Then your credit rating goes through the floor. The value of the Kenyan shilling goes out the window, even worse than Zimbabwe. You can't get loans, you can't get investment. That's a very dramatic strategy.